we stopped at price elasticity of supply. We talked about elasticity of supply and say that we have is affected by price. There's only one that we call price elasticity of the supply. So price elasticity of the supply. Perfect. So we got the interpretation. We say interpretation. What do you call interpretation of what you call price interpretation of elasticity of supply, or what you call elasticity of what you call supply. How do we interpret what you call elasticity of supply? So one, we have zero. We have zero less than elasticity of supply, elasticity less than one. Less than one. This is supply. We say supply, we know, is inelastic. Supply is basically what you call inelastic. In that case, supply is what you call basically inelastic. Supply is what you call inelastic. Supply is what you call inelastic together. Supply is inelastic together. So when you have elasticity, this is one. Number two, we have elasticity of supply greater than one. We say supply. Supply is what you call elastic. In this scenario, supply is what you call elastic. Together, team. We can draw them. We can basically have a drawing. We can basically have a drawing besides them. So we can have this, and we have that. So we can see a big change in price result into a smaller. This is supply is smaller. So this is Q1, this is Q2, Q1, Q2. So when you have P1, and then we have the P2. So P1 to P2 result into what we call a smaller change in quantity. So we can see it results into smaller change in the quantity demanded. That is what we call inelastic. This is what we call inelastic. Then when you have elastic, we can depict the diagram where we have a small change in price resulting to, this is supply curve, this is P, this is quantity. So small change, this is P1, P2, we can see Q1. So the bigger change in quantity, a bigger change in quantity. What we call a bigger change in what we call the quantity. A bigger change in the quantity. Then you have what we call when elasticity of supply is equals to 1, we call it unitary. We basically call it a unitary elasticity. Unitary elasticity. So the change in price is the same as change in quantity supply. The change in the same dimension, in the same ratio together. So normally when I draw this, I will always depict this. I will always depict it in, we have P1, then Q1, we have Q2. So change probably 20%. Change is 20%. Then we have change is 20%. So the same change in price, we have same change in what we call the quantity demanded together. So then we have the fourth we call it. Elasticity of supply is 0. When you have elasticity of supply being equals to 0, elasticity of supply being equals to 0, supply, we call it supply, being supplied perfectly, we call it perfectly. inelastic. That is what we call perfectly inelastic. So then we have it here. We have it here. So we have it there. So this is the supply. This is quantity. This is price. What changes? In this case, price changes, but the quantity supply does not change altogether. Then we have, when you have elasticity of supply being, that is amplified, being equals to infinity. That is math error. Elasticity of supply being equals to infinity. How do we depict it? We are going to have quantity supply changing, but price remaining constant. So that is what we call, this is perfectly, we call it perfectly elastic. We call that perfectly elastic. Respond to the yes, we call it perfectly elastic. So elasticity of supply is what we call infinity. Or when you do it, we find what we call a math error. Together, we have it as a math error. Tuko pamoja. So you can be asked, what is the types of price elasticity of supply? So these will be the types of price elasticity of supply. Interpretation, that will give you the types of price elasticity of supply. We respond with a yes if we are together. We have a yes if you're together. We respond with a yes if you're together. Are we together, team? So I'm saying that interpretation of elasticity of supply will give you what we call the types of price elasticity of supply. Together, respond with a yes if we are together. Perfect. So I want us to go to factors influencing what we call the factors influencing. What we call factors influencing. We call it the factors influencing. We call it factors influencing price elasticity of supply. What we call factors influencing what we call price elasticity of supply. Factors influencing price elasticity of supply. So when you talk about factors basically influencing price elasticity of supply, we have a number of factors. Number one, we have time. Kitawe, we have time. Number two, we have what's called ease of accumulating stock. We have inflation. We have what's called government policy. And then we have the nature of commodity. So I want to pick one by one. I start with the first one. The first factor being time. How does time basically influence what we call elasticity of supply? So when you talk about time, there's what we call the short run, and there's what we call the long run. Long run is after a long period of time. Short run is within a short period of time. So we need to understand that in the short run, we know that price elasticity of supply is inelastic. In the short run, price elasticity of supply is inelastic, while in the long run, price elasticity of supply is elastic. Is that point at home? Is that point at home? Perfect. So say that in the short run, in what we call the short run, say price elasticity, we say of supply. Price elasticity of supply is what we call is inelastic. Price elasticity of supply is basically what we call inelastic. While in the long run, we say while in the long run, we understand while in the long run, it is elastic. And we understand that due to changing, price, a smaller change in in price resulting to a bigger change in quantity supplied. When you talk about inelastic, a bigger change in price resulting to what we call a smaller change in quantity supplied. So we can talk about the ease of accumulating stock. The second, we call it ease of what we call accumulating stocks. We call it the ease of accumulating stock as the next factors that affect elasticity of supply. So we basically understand that a supply tends to be what we call elastic. Supply will always tend to be elastic if unsold stock. Supply tends to be elastic if unsold stock can be sold at low price to meet increase in demand. The supply tends to be what we call elastic if unsold stock can be sold at what we call a low price to meet what we call sudden increase in demand. Can be sold at what we call a low price to meet sudden, what we call the sudden increase in demand. To meet what we call sudden increase in demand. Is that point at home? We respond with a yes if that point is at home. So we say that supply tends to be elastic. Supply tends to be, call it elastic. Supply tends to be elastic. Supply basically tends to be elastic. Supply tends to be elastic. If unsold stock, we say if unsold stock, what do you call unsold stock? If the unsold stock can be sold at low price, can be sold, we call it at low price to meet, can basically be sold at low price to basically meet, can be sold at low price to meet any sudden increase in demand. Any sudden, what we call sudden increase, call it in demand. Sudden increase in demand. Sudden increase in demand. Then we have what we call existence of spare capacity. The next factor is what we call existence. So we call it existence of what we call spare capacity. Existence of what we call the spare capacity. Existence of what we call the spare capacity. It's good to see you, Eunice. Welcome back. So we understand the supply tends to be what we call elastic. Supply tends to be elastic. Supply, we understand the supply tends to be what we call elastic. Supply will definitely, existence of a spare capacity says supply basically tends to be elastic. Supply tends to be what we call elastic. If a farm possess, if what we call a farm, we say possess what we call a spare. A farm possess spare capacity. If a farm possesses what we call a spare capacity, and if labor and raw materials, and if what we call labor and raw materials, and if labor and raw materials, are readily available, and if labor and raw material, we understand, are readily available, and if labor and raw materials are basically what we call readily available. Together, team, that is the third factor, which is existence of spare capacity. Understood? Is that understood? Is that understood? We respond with a yes. If there's a query, you make sure you post that question. You make sure that you post that question. So I want to talk about the next factor, which is government policy. What do you call the government? What do you call the government policy? We call it the government policy. So we have a number of government policy. When we talk about government policy, we have a number of government policy. We can have a policy, for example, increase in tax. We can have a policy, for example, government restricting import. If the government basically has a policy of restricting import, what will it lead to in terms of elasticity? If a government basically puts in place a policy of restricting what you call import, will it result to elasticity of supply or inelasticity of supply? If a government basically has in place a policy, what you call policies of restricting import, what will happen to the elasticity of supply, which is price elasticity of supply? So if a government basically has in place a policy of restricting import, we know that of certain commodity, it will lead to what's called inelastic supply, whether an increase in price will definitely result into lower quantity supply, because there's a policy in place that basically restricts import. Understood? So say the government may restrict, we say that the government, we say may restrict. The government basically may restrict. The government may restrict import. The government may restrict import. We say that the government may restrict import or production. The government may basically restrict import or production of what you call of certain commodity, say leading of certain commodity, and say leading to inelastic, leading to what you call inelastic supply, leading to what you call inelastic supply, and that basically leading to what you call inelastic supply. We have the next factor, and that factor we call it inflation. That factor we call it inflation. How does inflation affect what we call elasticity of supply? Together, what is inflation? This is, whenever we talk about inflation, we'll say that this is the persistent rise in the prices of commodity altogether. Persistent rise in the prices of commodity. Paul, what happens during inflation? When you talk about inflation, Paul, what happens during inflation? When you talk about inflation, what happens during inflation? Quantity supplied during inflation is basically low. Are we together? So during inflation, we know the supply tends to be what? Inelastic. Together, team, supply will basically tend to be inelastic. So say during inflation, we say that during inflation, supply tend to be inelastic. We say that supply tend to be what they call inelastic. Supply basically tend to be inelastic. Supply tend to be what they call inelastic. Inelastic, since producers expect, since the producers expect prices to increase, since the producers basically expect the prices to increase, what you call more in the future. Since the producers expect the prices to increase more in the future. Since the producers expect the prices to increase more in the future. I want to discuss maybe two more. So we have the next, what we call the nature. We call it the nature of commodity. We call it the nature of the commodity. The next factor is what you call the nature of commodity, what you call the nature of the commodity. When you talk about the nature of commodity, what are forms of nature of commodity that we understand? Nature of commodity. So we have what we call durable goods and we have what we call perishable goods. In terms of elasticity of supply, that is being elastic and inelastic in relation to the nature of goods that I've talked about, durable and perishable goods. So when I talk about durable goods, these are goods that can last for a long period of time. Are we together? And when I talk about perishable goods, these are goods that cannot basically last for a long period of time. These are goods that basically cannot last for what you call for a long period of time. These are goods that cannot last for a long period of time. So in relation to the nature of goods, that is durable goods and perishable goods, how do we describe them in relation to perishability, in relation to inelastic and elastic? So durable goods last for a long time. So the supply, despite the price increasing, the supply is going to be low. So we understand that for durable goods, for durable goods, they have what we call inelastic supply. However, perishable goods, they have what we call elastic supply. For perishable goods, they have what we call elastic supply. Together, we respond with a yes. So durable goods, we say that durable goods, we say durable goods, we say you have inelastic supply, while what we call perishable goods, while the perishable goods have what we call elastic, while the perishable goods have elastic supply, while the perishable goods have what we call elastic supply, while the perishable goods have what we call elastic supply. Together, perishable goods have what we call elastic supply. We respond with a yes. Then I can describe maybe one number of farms in the market, what we call the number of farms. We call it the number of what we call farms in what we call in the market, number of farms in the market, stroke what we call the degree. We call it the degree of what we call of competition. Number of farms in the market, stroke what we call the degree of competition. So the number of farms basically in the market, stroke what we call the degree of competition. How does the degree of competition, stroke the number of farms in the market, affect the elasticity of supply? So basically say that when you have a greater number of farms in the industry, when you have a greater number of farms in the industry, what happens? We have a higher degree of elasticity of supply. Together, team, Kitawe, Eunice, Paul, and Zipporah. When you have what you call a higher number of farm in the market, we have elasticity of supply is going to be, price elasticity going to be elastic. Because a small change in price will definitely affect the quantity supplied. So say the greater the number of farms in the industry, the greater, we call it the greater the number of what we call farms in what we call in the industry. The greater the number of farms in the industry, the greater the number of farms in the industry, the higher, the more elastic is the supply. The more elastic is what we call the supply. The more elastic is the supply. The more elastic is the supply. Together. So these are factors that basically influence what we call the price elasticity of supply. Are they expanded perfectly well? If they are, then we respond with a yes. Are they expanded perfectly well? Perfect, Paul. So then I want to proceed to I want us to proceed to. I want us to proceed to. I want us to proceed to. I want us to proceed to what they call application of elasticity, of application of what you call of elasticity, application of what you call elasticity of supply, of what you call of supply in what you call in economic decision making, in economic decision making. So what you call the application of what you call elasticity of supply in economic decision. So when you talk about application, what do you mean by application? So when you talk about application, is areas where the concept elasticity of supply is basically applied to make what's called economic decision making. So when you talk about application, these are areas where this concept basically is going to be applied together. So application of elasticity of supply in economic decision. So number one, we need to understand we use it, the producers use it in setting prices together. The producers basically used it in setting what they call prices together. Number one, the producers will use this concept to set the prices altogether, to set what's called prices altogether. Our way together to set what's called prices. Number two, the government can use this concept to formulate what we call taxation policies. To formulate, government can use it to, by government for tax purpose or formulating the tax policy. We also know that the government can also use this concept of elasticity of supply to set what we call the prices. We say that, the farms or the producers basically use it to set the prices. At the same time, number two, I am saying that the government can basically use this concept to formulate what we call the tax policy or to come up with the tax purposes. But at the same time, I am saying that the concept of elasticity of supply can basically also be used for the government to set prices. Again, the government can use this concept of elasticity of supply in budgeting and allocation of resources. Budgeting and allocation of resources. And we have used for policy making by the government, basically used for policy making by the government together. Are those concepts clear? Are those concepts clear? We'll respond with a yes if the concept is clear. Who is PC? PC, what is your real name? Kindly give me your real name, PC. So number one, you say used for policy making. Number one, we say used for what you call for policy, what you call policy making. We call it by the government. Used for policy making by the government as the first one, used for policy making by the government. One is used for policy making by the government. Then we understand number two, used by government budgeting, used by government, used by the government. We call it used by the government. Say for budgeting, for what you call budgeting, and what you call an allocation, of what you call resources. Budgeting and what you call allocation of the resources. Budgeting and allocation of resources. They say the government in setting prices, used by the government, used by the government, what's called by the government in what you call setting, what you call the plan, used by the government basically in setting what you call the prices. So used by the government, used by the government, we say used by the government, and we say the word is for taxation purpose, for what you call for taxation for taxation purpose, used by the government for what's called for taxation purpose, used by the government fiscally for the taxation purpose, and you say producers, we know that producers in what we call setting, what we call the prices, in setting the prices of what we call of goods and services. So this is the application of what we call elasticity of supply. We respond with a yes if that is clear. Thank you, Paul. So I move to what's called determination. What we call the determination, what we call equilibrium prices, determination of what we call the market price. Determination, what we call determination of what we call of market price. Determination of the market price. What we call determination of the market price. So determination of the market price. In our quest to determine what we call the market price, the number of concepts that we really need to understand altogether, the number of concepts that we need to really understand. So we're saying that, who's PC? Kindly give me the name, your name, PC. PC is the Mary, your PC. Mary, are you the one called PC? So then, in determination of what we call market prices, the number of concepts that we need to really understand, who is PC, just to give me your full name. I always love knowing my students. Your full name, kindly, if you do not mind. So when you talk about determination of what we call the market price, the number of concepts that we really need to understand. One of the first concepts is what we call price. One of the first concepts is what we call the price altogether. Is what we call the price. Very important when you ask PC to give your name, it's very important. It's very important because I know my students. What's your name, PC? Kindly give me the name. Kindly forward the name, PC. That is very important. As PC does that for me, we continue. So the first one is in determination, we talk about what we call the concept price. So when you ask, what is the price? What is price? Eunice, what is price? Paul, what is price? Kitawe, what is price? Kitawe, what is price? What is price? When you say price, what do we mean by price? One of the first concepts that we talk about is price. But I want you to understand, price is what we call exchange of value for a commodity. What we call exchange of value of a commodity. Price is what we call exchange of value, what we call exchange of what we call of value for what we call for a commodity. For a commodity. We call it exchange of value for a commodity. That is basically what we mean by the price altogether. So in simple words, we're basically saying that whenever we talk about price, is basically the quantity of payment or compensation given in return of goods. Quantity of money, what we call the quantity of payment, what we call the quantity of payment, what we call the quantity of payment or compensation, we say given by one party to another, given by one party to another, given by one party to another, in return for a unit of goods or service. So that is the quantity of payment, or what we call compensation, given by one party to another in return for a unit of good or service. That's why I say exchange of value of commodity. And I've expounded that. Together, we respond with a yes. So how do I determine? I talk about what we call determination of price. How do we determine the price of a commodity in a system? How do we basically determine what we call the price of a commodity in a system? So one of the ways that we determine the price, we have what we call auction. Auction. This one to the highest bidder. Given to the highest, we call it the highest bidder. We call it to the highest bidder. Given to the highest bidder. This is commodity goes to the highest bidder as one of the first ways to determine what we call the price. Then we have what we call government policy. We have what we call the government. What we call the government policy. What we call the government policy. The second is what we call government policy. So what is government policy? We can have one of the policies, we call it price control. Price control. One of the policies, we call it price control. Who has heard of a price control? Basically, in line to this, we have two types of control, where we have what's called minimum price control, and what we call maximum price control. We have the minimum price control, and then we have what's called the maximum price control. When I talk about minimum, a price is basically set above the equilibrium. The price basically is set above the equilibrium. And basically, whenever we have what we call the minimum price control, the government basically is geared to protecting the person we call the producer. The government is basically geared to protecting a person that we know as producers, or to ensure that continuous supply of the commodity. But whenever we have what we call a policy that we call the maximum price control, or what we call the price ceiling, the government essentially is geared to protecting. We call it to protect. The government is geared to protect what we call the consumer. The government is basically geared to protecting the person that we call consumer. The government is basically geared to protecting the person that we call consumer. Are we together? To make sure that consumers are basically not exploited together. So how does government determine price? Using price controls, and we have the maximum and the minimum price control. Is that at home? So then we also have bargaining as one of the policies. We talk about bargaining. We have it as bargaining as one of the ways that government basically determine price. So when you talk about this, we basically determine price through the word is negotiation. The bargaining is through negotiation, where we eventually get to the price through basically what we call negotiation. We get to the price based on what we call negotiation. Then you have what's called the price leadership. Price leadership as another method. What we call the price leadership. We have what's called the price leadership. So whenever we talk about a price leadership, we have a market structure that we call oligopolist market structure. And that we shall be able to discuss. That is in the last topic of microeconomics. When you talk about price leadership, we shall be able to discuss that under a market structure that we call, under a market structure that we basically call, and that we call oligopolist together, where we have price leadership. Price leadership occurs where one firm sets the price and other in the market sells that at that price. We say that one firm basically sets the price and the other firm sells at that price. The question is, how are we able to achieve what we call the price leadership? How are we able to achieve what we call the price leadership? That is a big question. That how are we able to achieve what we call the price leadership? We are able to achieve price leadership by what we call the low-cost farm. Low-cost farm. Low-cost farm. Or we can have what we call dominant. When you're a dominant farm, you're able to dictate what we call dominant farm or the low-cost farm. These are ways that we're able to achieve what we call the price leadership together. Together, we respond to this. Then you have something that we call retail price mechanism, RPM. What we call the retail, we call it the retail price mechanism. What we call the retail price mechanism, that is RPM. RPM, retail price mechanism, what we call the RPM. Retail price mechanism, what we call the RPM. How do we determine using what we call the retail price mechanism, and that is what we call the RPM. So this RPM is whereby producers dictate price below which commodity cannot be sold. Producers, we know that producers determines the price below which price, we call it below which commodity, we call it price below which commodity, we call it the price below which commodity, we call it the price below which commodity cannot be sold. They dictate cannot be sold. Who dictates? It's the producers that basically dictate. It is the producers that basically dictate. Producers, we know that dictate or determine. We see that dictate the price below which dictates the price below which commodity cannot be sold. And that is the retail price mechanism. And we call it the RPM. RPM. Together, team. We'll respond to this. Then lastly, very interesting, what we want to discuss in depth, that is the market forces of demand and supply. Market forces of what we call of demand and what we call supply. Market forces of what we call demand and supply. What we call the market forces of demand and supply. What we call the market forces of demand and supply. We call it the market forces of demand and supply. You see, when you are talking about economic systems, basically we talked about a number of economic systems. We talked about the free economic system. We talked about the mixed economic system, mixed economic system. And we are basically saying that when you talk about a free economic system, that I did call a capitalist economic system, I basically introduced this concept where we say that prices are essentially being determined by the forces of demand, and there's no government intervention. And when I got to what you call the mixed economic system, I did say that under the mixed economic system, prices are basically being determined by what we call the forces of demand and supply, but at the same time, there's government determination of the prices. Are we together? So determined by the forces of demand and supply. So how do we determine the prices? This is basically determined by the interaction. I know you did it for those who, by the interaction of demand and supply. This is basically determined. We call it determined. We call it determined. We call it determined by what we call the interaction. It's called by the interaction of what we call of demand and what we call supply, by determination of interaction of demand, by the interaction of demand and supply forces. So the market price, guys, if we draw this, at this point now, we should understand how demand and supply operate. Which curve is this? Is this supply or demand? That curve, is it a supply or a demand curve? Is that a supply or a demand curve? Right now, I should be having very good students. Is that is supply curve? Very, it means that you have been doing something good. How do I know? I basically understand when price increases based on the law of supply. Based on the law of supply, I basically understand when prices increases, quantity supplied also increase. Then we have this as demand. So at this point, we know that interaction. So this will be PE, which is equilibrium price, and this will be QE, which is what we call equilibrium quantity. Perfect. Has everybody understood that? Has everybody understood that? If we have, then we give it a yes. If we have, we give it a yes. So then I want to go now to market prices. Market prices. So market prices, those are the market prices. We all understand that when you talk about the market price or the equilibrium price is where is determined, refers to the prevailing price in the market as determined by the forces of demand and supply. So it refers to the prevailing, refers to what we call the prevailing, refers to the prevailing, say prices in the market, prices in what we call in the market, prevailing prices in the market, the prevailing prices in the market, we say as determined, as basically determined, as determined by the forces, we say by the forces, as determined by the forces of what we call of demand and supply, as basically determined by the forces of demand and supply, as basically determined by the forces of supply and demand. So determination, how do I basically know? Kitawe, Eunice, PC failed to give me his name, but I'm insisting, kindly give me your name. So the method of determining market prices, methods, what do you call the methods of determining market prices. Methods of what you call determining what you call the market prices. So how do we determine the market price? So we basically have three methods. One is using what you call this demand and supply schedule. We have what we call the graphical method. And lastly, we have what we call the equation together. So I've said, how do I determine? If the three, this is demand, I have demand, and what you call the supply, and what you call the supply schedule. What you call the supply schedule, I have the demand, and what you call the supply schedule. Number two, we have what you call graphical. We call it the graphical. We call it the graphical method. We call it the graphical method. We call it the graphical method. And lastly, we have what we call equations. We have what we call the equations. We have what we call equations. Equations for demand and supply. We have what we call equation, general demand, use of demand and supply equation. Use of what we call demand, and what we call the supply equation, and the supply equation. Use of this demand and supply equation. All of us at home. So I want to start with one that we call demand and supply schedule. I want to start with what we call demand. The first one we call it the demand. We have demand and what we call supply and the supply schedule. Demand and what we call the supply schedule. We have the first one that we call the demand and supply schedule. So on one end, I have the prices. The prices, we have what we call quantity, what we call quantity demanded. This is units, quantity demanded units. Then you have the quantity supplied. This is basically in units. Quantity supplied, that is basically in units. Quantity supplied, that is basically in units. So I have price 5, I have 10, I have 15, I have 20, we have 25, we have 25, and then we have 30, we have 30, we have 35. We have 35. So look at, when the price is 5, at lower price we expect, this is 100, the quantity demand is 100, this is 40. When this one goes to 10, this is 90. This one is also increasing, supply is definitely increasing, depicting what's called the demand, law of demand, and depicting what we call the law of supply. So this is 80, this is 70, it's reducing, this is 60, this is 50, and finally this is 40. Are we able to see? While supply is increasing, as price increases, so this is 60, this is 70, this is 80, this is 90, and this is 100. Together, team. So this is supply and demand schedule. We respond with a yes. Perfect point. Perfect point. So when I'm using supply and demand function, how do I establish? The question is, how do I establish? How do I establish equilibrium price and market price, which is the equilibrium price? Is where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. At equilibrium price is where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. Where do I have it? I have it at 20. Guys, if you come at 20, we're able to see that the quantity demanded is 70 and the quantity supplied is 70. So at equilibrium price, we know that the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied is equal. Sawa sawa. Tuko sawa. So if I'm given demand schedule, I can get equilibrium price. So easy. It is a point where the quantity demanded is equals to what we call the quantity supplied is equals to what we call the quantity supplied. So we understand that market price is where we understand that as a name P, we give it market price. Market price is what we call is where what we call the quantity demanded is equal, is what we call equal to quantity supplied is equal to quantity supplied. So the quantity demanded is basically equal to what we call quantity supplied is basically equals to the quantity supplied together. I hope that method is at home. So I proceed to method 2. I call it the graphical. Method 2, I call it what we call the graphical method. Method 2, I call it what we call the graphical method. So number one at the back of the mind, we all understand that when you talk about graphical methods, what do we use? We use the graphs. We use what we call the graphs. On the graphical methods, we essentially use what we call the graphs altogether. So on the graph, you're going to plot the demand function, and you're going to plot what we call the supply function. You realize that at the point where supply and demand meet, those quantities are equal altogether. Are we together? Determined, we just say by determined. We understand determined. We say by plotting, what we call plotting, demand, and what we call supply, and what we call supply functions. Plotting what we call the demand and what we call the supply function. Plotting what we call the demand and supply function. Plotting what we call the demand and supply function. What we call plotting the supply and demand function. Plotting what we call the supply and demand function. Plotting what we call the supply and the demand function together. If I plot this, look up. If I plot this, I'm giving a sketch because we do not have a graph. We are not able to determine this. What we can get is a sketch, is what we call a sketch. Are we together? Kitawe, can you get the exact values? We cannot get. This is simply what we call a sketch. A sketch. We can only have a sketch. Together, Kitawe, just 1 minute. 1 minute to respond to something. So that we proceed. Sorry for that break that we've taken. So then we talked about graph, graphical method. And we say that on the graphical method, we're basically doing what? We are plotting the graph. We are plotting what we call the demand and supply function. But based on this, we cannot plot. The reason why we cannot plot, the only thing that can happen is that we can sketch. So if you're to sketch, based on this information, if you have a sketch based on the information that we have there, we should have an information flowing like this. So this is supply, this is demand. And based on that information, if we plot it effectively well, we know that if here is price, price is going to be 20, and equilibrium quantity is going to be 70. But mark my word, I've said that that is a sketch. I have said that that is basically what we call a sketch. A sketch. That is what we basically call a sketch. A sketch. Together. That is what we call a sketch. We respond with a yes. We respond with a yes. Then use of demand, what we call use of what we call demand, and what we call the supply function. Use of what we call demand and what we call the supply function. The use of demand and supply function. I want to depict those functions. How does I have QD, this is the demand function, is equals to what we call A minus BP. BP. A minus BP. A minus BP. A minus BP. A minus BP. What we call A minus BP. A minus BP together. A minus BP. So look at this. I want to depict what is happening here. Where when I have this QD is quantity demanded. QD is basically what we call the quantity demanded. QD is what we call quantity demanded. This represents what we call the quantity. We call it quantity demanded. We call it the quantity demanded. A represents what we call this A. We understand that represents what we call this A basically represents what we call the y-intercept. When you talk about the y-intercept, Paul, y-intercept, we call it the y-intercept. When you call it the y-intercept, what is y-intercept? The value of y, the value of y when x is 0. That is what we call the y-intercept together. The value of x when, the value of y when x is equal to 0. So when you talk about x-intercept, at x-intercept, the value of y is 0. At y-intercept, the value of x is 0 together. Then I have B is what we call gradient. B is what we call the gradient. We call it gradient stroke slope. We call it the gradient stroke slope. And P is what we call the price. P is what we call the price. So this is what we call the gradient. This is what we call the gradient. B is the gradient. remember this is gradient, then P is what we call the price, Respond with a yes. We respond with a yes. If we are together, we respond with a yes. So then, some of the things that are some of the things that I needed to teach you along the way about economics. I want to teach you something about economics. Look up. One of the things about this economics is a bit wider. You notice that it's who has gone through the syllabus. It's a bit wide. Have you noted that? I want to bring to your attention. Economics is a bit wide. Yes, it's wide. So I want you people to pull up your sleeves. Pull up your sleeves together. Then, whatever I'm covering currently, we call it microeconomics. Are we together? Mary, PC, we call it microeconomics. Whatever I'm covering right now, we call it microeconomics. Whatever we are covering presently, we call it microeconomics. The danger with the microeconomics is because the answers that are required when an examination is particularly set on this particular area, it requires very specific answers. You cannot write your own things. There requires what we call specific answers together. Specific answer together. So this microeconomics, as we do it, you must be very sensitive with it. Make sure you don't miss these classes together. But I will push you a little bit. In this econ, I'm supposed to push you a little bit. So when I push you a little bit harder, don't run away, please. When you see me, sometimes I'll start extending some of the classes in order to push it and push it and push it and push it. Don't be annoyed. Please just allow me to push you. Is that okay, team? Now you are now ready. You are now ready. Right now we have grown for some time. So I'm able to tell you what I need, where we need to squeeze. I'm able to push our way together. So this I will push you a little bit as opposed to some of the units that I teach. This one I will push you a little bit harder because it requires a lot. So look up. The questions that are basically in an examination. So you will tell an examiner will ask you, an examiner will always ask you, which one is the demand curve and which one is the supply curve? Supply curve. So I put something called an NB. I put an NB. Demand function, a demand function has what we call has a negative gradient. So demand function will always have the gradient being negative. So if I'm asked by examiner, the Zipporah, I'm given two functions, I equate them to Q is equivalent to this. So if the gradient is negative, that basically implies that is a demand function. Demand functions have what we call a negative gradient. Demand function has what we call a negative gradient. Tuko pamoja. So look at demand function. The gradient is negative. So if I'm given an equation, I'm supposed to make Q the subject and determine the coefficient with P. If it's negative, then therefore that would be a demand function, because you understand that a demand function basically has what you call a negative gradient. So I don't have to do it. Sometimes some people waste their time. Anaeka P hapa, anaeka Q hapa. Alafu anasema, you say when it's 1, it is this. When it's increasing, if it's demand, it should be reducing. If it's increased, it should be reducing. You simply need to make Q the equation. You simply have to make the Q the equation. And if the gradient is negative, then therefore that implies that that is a demand function. Kitawe tuko sawa. That basically implies that that is a demand function. That is a demand function. I proceed to equation 2. general supply function. We call it the 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 general supply function. We call it what we call the general supply function. And Saturday, I'm going to past paper. So make sure that you have the link. I'll be doing questions from past paper. That is on Saturday. We'll go to elasticity, those questions of elasticity in the past paper. So supply function, we call it QS is equal to A plus BP. So QS is what we call, we give it as quantity supplied. We give it as what we call quantity supplied. We give it as the quantity supplied. And then we have A. A is what we call the y-intercept. We give it as the y-intercept. B is what we call the gradient. B is the gradient. Then we have P is what we call price. But an NB, for a supply function, we need to understand that for a supply function, we say the gradient, we call the gradient, is what we call is always positive. So if you make Q the subject and the coefficient PP is positive, then that is a supply function. That is a supply function. Together, that is what we call a supply function. Together, that is what we call a supply function. That is what we call a supply function. We call it a supply function. We call it a supply function. So I want to do an illustration before I give you a small break. Illustration 1. I do illustration. Allow me to do illustration. We know the following represents, we say the following. The following represent, we say the following. The following, we say it represents what we call demand and what we call supply function. The following represents what we call demand and supply function. The following represents demand and supply function for what we call for a certain market. The demand and supply for a certain market. So we have a demand function that is QD. QD is equal to, we have 20 minus 4P. And then we have QS, which is supply function. We have negative 10 plus 6P. Negative 10 plus 6P. Are we seeing that? Negative 10 plus 6P. Are we seeing that? If you think that, we respond with a yes. If we are seeing that. So the question examiner asks us, determine equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So determine, examiner tells us determine what we call equilibrium. Equilibrium, price, and quantity. Determine what we call the equilibrium price and the quantity. Determine what we call the equilibrium price and quantity. Determine what we call equilibrium price and quantity. Determine what we call equilibrium price and what we call equilibrium quantity. At equilibrium price, are we together? At equilibrium price and quantity, at equilibrium, what we call at equilibrium, we understand that at equilibrium, we understand that the quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. Tuko pamoja. At equilibrium, we have the quantity demanded being equal to quantity supplied. So we equate demand function to supply function. We equate what we call the demand function to supply function. We equate what we call the demand function to what we call the supply function together. We equate what's called the demand function to supply function. Is that at home? We equate demand function is equal to supply function together units. So what is the demand function? The demand function is saying 20 minus 4p is equal to the supply function, which is negative 10 plus what you have as 6p. Negative 10 plus what you have as 6p. Negative 10 plus what you have, negative 10 plus 6p. Negative 10 plus 6p. So we come here, and we come here. So we collect the like terms. This is like terms. Bring it to the other side. Negative 4, take it to the other side. What does it become? It becomes positive. Are you saying if I take negative 4 to the other side, it becomes what? Kitao? It becomes positive. So when I take this negative 4, I'll have 6p, but I say plus 4p. Then this one, I take it to the other side, negative 10. What will it be? It will be plus. It will be plus. Are you seeing that? When now this one, when I take to this side, it becomes positive. When I take negative 10 to this side, it becomes also positive. So on this end, I basically have 20 plus 10. So what do you have? I have 30 is equals to 10p. I have 30 being equals to 10p. All of us are we together? 30 being equals to 10p. So at that point, I divide both sides by 10. So equilibrium price, which is P, equilibrium price, I get it as 3. Are you getting equilibrium price as 3? Equilibrium price, are we getting it as 3? We give me a yes if you're getting. So how do I get equilibrium quantity? We now have what's called the equilibrium quantity. So equilibrium quantity, essentially, when you talk about equilibrium quantity, we understand that equilibrium quantity now, we can use any of the function. Which one do you want me to use? I can use demand function, and I can use supply function and get what they call the equilibrium quantity. Which one do you want me to use? Should I use supply or demand to get equilibrium quantity? Any of it will still give me the same value. Whether I choose this or this will still give me demand function. So just come and say Q is equals to demand function is equals to 20 times P to Mepata, P is 3. 20 minus 4 times 3. So I have Q being equals to 20 minus 12. So Q is equals to what you have as 8 units. Q is equals to what you call 8 units. So Q is what you call 8 units together. Q is what you have as 8 units. Allow me to pick a supply function. If I pick a supply function, I'll say Q is equal to negative 10 plus, look up, that is 6 times 3. So I have Q is equal to negative 10 plus 18. We still have Q being 8 units. So equilibrium quantity is 8 units. Equilibrium price is 3 shillings. Sorted. Are we together? Are we sorted? If you're sorted, we respond with a yes. So we can have a short break. We can have a short break so that I see others are tired. We can have that short break. Or you don't need that short break? I give you that short break. Let me give you that short break. So we can resume. Are we there? We can resume. We respond if you're there. Are we there? If you're there, we respond with a yes. So I can give you the next example, but on Saturday we get 2 examples. I will do elasticity based on question paper. So this is yours. I want you to sort this. We say as an assignment. So the following represents demand. We say the following. Say it represents. Example 2, the following represents what we call demand and supply function. So the following represents demand and what we call supply function. The following represents demand and supply function. For a commodity, we say for what we call a commodity. For a commodity, we say in what we call in a certain market. In what we call a certain market. So the following represents demand and supply function for a commodity in what we call in a certain market. So we have the demand function. So we have the QD. QD is equal to 15 minus 3P. Then you have QS being negative 12 plus 9. Negative 12 plus 9P. So then we have what we call required. So we have the required. One is what's called determine equilibrium price and quantity. Determine what's called equilibrium price and what's called quantity. I want the students to get this. Once you get this, you are set free. Once you get that, I'll set you free. Once you get that, then I set you free. So if you get that, you're set free. Once you have that, then we set you free. Can you do that, Italy? Eunice, can you do that? Eunice, can you do that? Perfect, to do that for me. So 2 minutes, you do that. Then we see that perfectly done well. Who has gotten that? So Mary has done it. Mary gets equilibrium price to be 2.25. Somebody else? If I have two people done with it. So once you have this at equilibrium, we have QD is equals to QS. QD is basically equals to QS. That is at equilibrium. QD is equals to QS. Perfect. I think majority are getting that. So we can equate that by just saying 15 minus 3P is equals to negative 12 plus 9P. Take this one to the other side, it becomes positive. This one also becomes 4. So 15 plus 12 is equals to 9P plus 3P. So this should be 27 is equals to 12P. When I divide both sides, that should be P is equivalent to, when you have our calc, that should be 2.25. Are we together? Then equilibrium quantity, I can pick any. So I can have 15 minus 3 times 2.25. So 2.25 times 3, I have 15 minus 6.75. That should be 8.25 units together, shillings. So all of us, are we together? So I explained what we are going to do on Saturday. The notes that I should have sent for you, I'm sending notes for macro. They're all of the notes for macro. Kindly, I'm sending macro. Macroeconomics, I'm sending them. I should have sent them even on the first date, but I'm sending all macro. That is, I'm sending macro. Inflation and employment, I'm sending all those notes in the group right now. Right now. Eunice, is that okay? I'm sending those notes right now so that you start reading. I'm sending those notes so that you do what? You start reading. Kindly start reading those notes. I'm sending the notes now. Kitawe, for economics macro, I don't know why I forgot. I should have sent those notes right away, but I'm sending them right now for macro. So that by the time I get there, you have started reading and you're conversant with that. So I beg to close at that point, unless there's somebody who has a question. Is there anybody with a question as per regarding what we have done today or anything that is important for our learning? Anything that is important for our learning? Is there any question? Perfect if there's none. So continue to support Focus Online College. We played with you to continue supporting Focus Online College. I hope you're happy. You're very happy with the class, which is one of the most important things. If you're happy, then we are happy. So I want to say that God bless you and God bless our class. I'm sending macro notes right away. So God bless you and God bless our class. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kitawe. Thank you, Paul.